Mr. Edgerton was suffering from writer's block, a most distressing complaint. The closest he had come to a writing project in the past 6 months was the construction of his weekly grocery list. To complicate matters further, Mr. Edgerton's wallet had begun to feel decidedly lightweight of late, and nothing will dampen a man's ardour for life more than an empty pocket. And so, once again, he found himself wandering the streets of the city, vainly hunting for inspiration, with the wrenching hunger of a beggar seeking scraps for his belly. In time, he came to Charing Cross Road, but the miles of shelved books only depressed him further, especially since he could find none of his own among their number. He was almost at the magistrate's court when something caught his eye in the window of a small antique shop. There, partially hidden behind a framed portrait of General Gordon and a stuffed magpie, was a most remarkable ink-pot. It was silver and about 4 inches tall, with a lacquered base adorned by Chinese characters. But what was most striking about it was the small, mummified monkey that perched upon its lid, its clawed toes clasped upon the rim and its dark eyes gleaming in the summer sunlight. It really was a most ghastly creature. But Mr. Edgerton had acquired the civilized man's taste for the grotesque, and he quickly made his way into the darkened shop to inquire about the nature of the item in question. The owner of the business proved to be a veritable fount of knowledge about the items in his possession. The mummified primate was, he informed the writer, an ink-pot monkey, a creature of Chinese mythology. According to the myth, the monkey provided artistic inspiration in return for the residues of ink left in the bottom of the inkwell. Although Mr. Edgerton was not by nature superstitious, he was a man profoundly in need of inspiration from any source. He paid over money he could ill afford for the faint hope of redemption offered by the curiosity, and made his way back to his small apartments with the inkpot and its monkey tucked beneath his arm in a cloak of brown paper. That evening, Mr. Edgerton sat at his desk once again and stared at the paper before him, and stared, and stared. After a number of unproductive hours had gone by, their tedium broken only by the spread of an occasional ink blot upon the paper, Mr. Edgerton rose and determined to amuse himself by emptying and then refilling his pen. He reached down and gently grasped the monkey in order to raise the lid, when something pricked his skin painfully. He drew back his hand immediately and examined the wounded digit. A deep cut ran across the pad of his index finger, and blood from the abrasion was flowing down the length of his pen and congregating at the nib, from which it dripped into the inkpot with soft, regular splashes. Mr. Edgerton began to suck the offended member, meanwhile turning his attention to the monkey in an effort to ascertain the cause of his injury. The lamplight revealed a small raised ridge behind the creature's neck, where a section of curved spine had burst through its tattered fur. A little of Mr. Edgerton's blood could be perceived on the yellowed pallor of the bone. The wounded writer retrieved a small bandage from his medicine cabinet, then cleaned and bound his finger before resuming his seat at his desk. He regarded the monkey warily as he filled his pen from the well, then put it to paper and began to write. He wrote long into the night, refilling his pen as required, and so bound up was he in his exertions that he failed entirely to notice that his wound had reopened and was dripping blood onto pen and page, and, at those moments when he replenished his instrument, into the depths of the small Chinese inkpot. Mr. Edgerton slept late the following morning and awoke to find himself weakened by his efforts of the night before. He returned to his desk to find that the inkpot monkey had fallen from its perch and now lay on its back amid the pencils and pens. Gingerly, Mr. Edgerton lifted it from the desk and found that it now weighed considerably more than the inkpot itself, and the physics, rather than any flaw in the inkpot's construction, had played its part in dislodging the monkey from its seat. And then, quite suddenly, Mr. Edgerton felt the monkey move. Its arms and legs stretched wearily, as if it was waking from some long slumber, and its mouth opened in a wide yawn, displaying small, blunt teeth. Alarmed, Mr. Edgerton dropped the monkey and heard it emit a startled squeak as it landed on the desk. It lay there for a moment or two, then slowly raised itself on its haunches and regarded the writer with a slightly hurt expression before ambling over to the inkpot and squatting down gently beside it. Despite his unnerving encounter with the newly animated monkey, Mr. Edgerton put in a most productive day and quickly found himself with the bulk of 5 chapters written, none of them requiring more than a cursory rewrite. It was only when the light had begun to fade and Mr. Edgerton's arm had started to ache that the monkey awoke and padded softly across a virgin page to where Mr. Edgerton's pen lay in his hand. The monkey grasped his index finger with its tiny paws, then placed its mouth against the cut and began to suck. It took Mr. Edgerton a moment to realize what was occurring, at which point he rose with a shout and shook the monkey from his finger. It bounced against the inkpot, striking its head soundly against the base, and lay unmoving upon a sheet of paper. Instantly, Mr. Edgerton was seized with regret at his hasty action. He had endangered the monkey, which he now acknowledged to be the source of his newfound inspiration. Without it, he would be lost. Torn between fear and disgust, Mr. Edgerton reluctantly made his decision. He squeezed together his thumb and forefinger, causing a droplet of blood to emerge from the cut, and then, his gorge rising, allowed it to drip into the monkey's mouth. The effect was instantaneous. The little mammal's eyes opened fully. It rose on its haunches, and then reached for and grasped the wounded finger. There it suckled happily, undisturbed by the revolted Mr. Edgerton, until it had taken its meal, whereupon it burped contentedly and resumed its slumbers. And thus it continued. Each day Mr. Edgerton rose, fed the monkey a little blood, wrote, fed the monkey once again in the evening, wrote some more, then went to bed and slept like a dead man. The monkey itself appeared to require little in the way of affection or attention beyond its regular feeds of blood and the occasional ripe banana. Mr. Edgerton, in turn, decided to ignore the fact that the monkey was growing at quite an alarming rate, so that it was now obliged to sit beside him on a small chair while he worked, and had taken to dozing on the sofa after its meals. In fact, it was not until Mr. Edgerton returned home from a visit to his publisher to find the monkey trying on one of his suits that he began to experience serious doubts about their relationship. He had noticed some new and especially disturbing changes in his companion. It had begun to molt, leaving clumps of unsightly grey hair on the carpets and exposing sections of pink-white skin. It had also lost some weight from its face. That, or its bone structure, had begun to alter, for it now presented a more angular aspect than it had done previously. In addition, the monkey was now over 4 feet tall, and Mr. Egerton had been forced to open veins in his wrists and legs in order to keep it sated. Yet there were still chapters of the book to be completed, and the writer was reluctant to alienate his mascot. On the 29th day of August, he delivered his completed manuscript to his publisher. On the 4th day of September, which was Mr. Egerton's birthday, he was gratified to receive a most delightful communication from his editor, praising him as a genius and promising that this novel, long anticipated and at last delivered, would place Mr. Egerton in the pantheon of literary greats and assure him of a most comfortable and well-regarded old age. That night, as Mr. Egerton prepared to drift off into contented sleep, he felt a tug at his wrist, and looked down to see the inkpot monkey fastened upon it, its cheeks pulsing as it sucked away at the cut. "Tomorrow," thought Mr. Egerton, "tomorrow I will deal with it. Tomorrow I will have it taken to the zoo, and our bargain will be concluded forever." But as he grew weaker, and his eyes closed, the inkpot monkey raised its head, and Mr. Egerton realized at last that no zoo would ever take the inkpot monkey, for the inkpot monkey had become something very different indeed. Mr. Egerton's book was published later that year to universal acclaim. A reception was given in his honour by his grateful publishers, to which the brightest lights of London's literary community flocked to pay tribute. It would be Mr. Egerton's final public appearance. From that day forth, he was never again seen in London, and instead retired to the small country estate that he purchased with the royalties from his great valedictory work. That night, speeches were made, and an indifferent poem recited by one of Mr. Egerton's new admirers, but the great man himself remained silent throughout. When called upon to give his speech, he replied only with a small but polite bow to his guests, accepting their applause with a gracious smile. And while all those around him drank the finest champagne, and feasted on stuffed quail and smoked salmon, Mr. Egerton could be found sitting quietly in a corner, stroking some unruly hairs on his chest, and munching contentedly on a single ripe banana.
Only the worst and most desperate of clergy were dispatched to the living at Black Sands, for the community had long resisted the intrusions of organized religion. There were exceptions, of course. There was a duty upon the church and its clergy not to allow a community to exist without the light of the true faith to guide it, and so it was given to me as my first meagre living. From the rectory window, I could see the ghosts of the waves descending upon the dark shore, white on black. When they broke, it was as if the very sands had devoured them. The church itself was a humble thing, close by the beach, and the village was little more than a huddle of small houses spread over 5 or 6 narrow streets. There was a shop devoted to the sale of whatever the residents might require, from a clothes peg to a cartwheel, and beside it stood a small pub. Both premises were owned by the unofficial mayor of Black Sands, a Mr. Webster. He was a tall, cadaverous man, with the manner of an undertaker measuring up a particularly impoverished client for a cheap coffin. He politely declined my request to post the times of services in either of his premises. "As I informed your predecessor, we have no need of your presence here," he informed me, with a half-smile as he walked with me along the main street of the village. "I am no theologian, but it seems to me that there are many religions and many gods. There are other gods than yours, Mr. Benson, older gods. Each has a place. That I do not doubt. Unfortunately, the place for yours is not here." "I choose to stay," I replied. He shrugged. "Then we may yet find a use for you." The whispering began early in November. At first it sounded like the wind in the grass, but when I went to my window, the branches of the trees appeared unmoving. Still it came, sometimes soft, sometimes keening, speaking words I could not understand. I glimpsed a light moving on the promontory to the north, where a circle of old stones stood. My curiosity aroused, I dressed hastily, and wrapped in my dark coat, made my way through the fields toward the path that led to the ancient site. I was almost within sight of the trail when some instinct made me fall to the ground. Two shapes appeared on the path above me, the forms of men marching silently along. Webster stood, waiting for them at the circle, a lantern resting upon the flat stone before him. He was dressed in his usual tweeds, the tail of his overcoat flapping in the breeze. "Do you have it?" he said. One of the two men who had joined him, a dour farmer named Prater, handed over something white, a cleric's stole. One had gone missing from my washing line earlier in the week, and I had been driven almost to distraction trying to guess what might have happened to it. Now I knew. Webster picked up his lantern. Instantly his face was illuminated, but it seemed to me that I saw regret there. Or, so I hope now, in the light of what was to occur later. "It has to be done," said Prater. "It's the way of things." Webster shook his head slightly. "There will soon come a time when it will no longer be possible," he said. "And what then?" asked the third man, whose name I did not know. "Then the old ones will be forgotten, and the new will take their place." He picked up the stole, and he and his companions walked down to the beach. There they dug a hole in the sand and placed the garment within, before carefully covering up the hole once again. Then they returned to the village. I stayed where I was for a time, until I was certain that they would not return, then followed the path they had taken down to the shore. It was the work of only a few moments to find the little mound left by them, beneath which the remains of my church garment lay. I stood there for a time, uncertain of how to proceed. I was terribly afraid, and prayed for guidance, but none came. Instead, feeling that I was betraying the very faith I had so ardently defended to Webster, I removed my stole and returned to the rectory. The next day, I rose early and made my way into the village. I stopped by Webster's pub as he was making his preparations for the day. He found it hard to meet my gaze, but I gave no indication that I recognized his unease. "I was wondering," I said, "if I could trouble you for a cup of tea. I must confess I feel a little weak this morning and in need of something to fortify me for the walk home." "Why, I could give you something stronger than tea, if you like," he said. "Tea will be fine," I said, and watched as he disappeared into the kitchen behind the bar in order to heat the water. He was gone for only a couple of minutes, but in that time I did all that I needed to do. From the pocket of his jacket, which always hung on a hook behind the bar, I removed a worn white handkerchief, praying to God to forgive me as I did so. Then, once Webster returned, I sat with him and drank my tea, maintaining a pretense of normality, while fearing throughout that he might sniffle or sneeze, causing him to search for his handkerchief. When I was done, I offered him money for the tea, but he refused. "On the house," he said, "just to show there are no hard feelings." "None whatsoever," I said, before I walked to the seashore and buried his handkerchief in the coarse, dark sand. I did not sleep that night, so that when I heard my name being called, I was almost expecting the summons. Webster was below my window, a lamp in his hand. "You must come quickly," he shouted. "There is a body on the seashore." I left my bed, pulled on my clothes and shoes, and descended to the door, but Webster was already running ahead of me by the time I got it open. "Come on," he cried. "Hurry!" I paused and drew a stout birch stick from my umbrella stand. I followed Webster's light until I arrived at the edge of the dunes looking down on the beach. Where the waves were breaking, a black bundle lay. Ahead of me, Webster was beckoning, calling me closer, but the bundle at his feet remained unmoving, even when I knelt down beside it in the light and probed gently at it. Slowly, my hands shaking, I drew back the damp black cloth that covered it. It was a dog. A dead dog. I looked up to find Webster's light beginning to recede from me as he tried to leave me alone on the beach. I was about to stand when I was momentarily distracted by a stinging sensation against my face. I brushed at the spot, and my fingers came away with a coating of black sand. All around me the grains were moving, shifting. Shapes rose and fell, forming columns that held their shape for an instant before disintegrating into dark clouds that fell onto the beach below. They might almost have been human. I thought I discerned horns emerging from their heads, warped and twisted growths that appeared to curl round their skulls, ending at their necks. The whispering began, and I understood at last that it was not language I had heard on past nights, but the movement of the sands, the individual molecules brushing against each other, reconstituting themselves in strange configurations. Clawed feet, taloned hands, and lidless eyes appeared, as if beings buried beneath the surface were somehow finding a means of expressing their ancient, lost forms. Now Webster was running, making for the safety of the dunes and the raised stone slab that rested on the promontory. I followed him, my progress arrested by the sponge-like quality of the terrain. Behind me, I sensed a form rising high, and then sand was filling my eyes and mouth like fingers clasped suddenly across my face. I spat and wiped at my face with my sleeve, but did not look over my shoulder. Ahead of me, Webster was tiring. I narrowed the gap between us by another 5 or 6 feet, then threw my stick with all the force I could muster. It struck him firmly on the back of the head, and he tumbled awkwardly to the ground. He tried to rise, but I caught him a glancing blow with my foot. I clutched at a patch of marram grass, drew myself up, and looked down on the black sands. "You can't escape," he called. "These are the old gods, the true gods." He stood and rubbed the sand from his clothes. He appeared wary of the approaching forms, but not fearful. "Embrace it," Webster continued. "This is your death." "No," I cried. "It's not my death. These are not my gods." And I removed from my pocket the stained cloth of my stole and displayed it to him. And as the realization dawned, Webster was surrounded by what appeared to be columns of swirling grains. I saw him try to break through, but the intensity of their movement increased, blinding him and forcing him back. And then, of a sudden, they disappeared, and all was still. Webster's thin form was left standing alone in the dying light from the burning oil. All movement had ceased on the beach. He raised his head uncertainly to me and reached out a hand. Instinctively I lay down and stretched out my own hand to him. Whatever he had tried to do to me, I could not leave him in peril. Our fingers were almost touching when a shape appeared close by Webster's feet. I saw an oval of sand rise up with 2 holes about midway down its form, like the sunken sockets of eyes. The bridge of a ruined nose stretched between them, framed on either side by a pair of jagged cheekbones, and then, around Webster's feet, a maw opened. I saw lips, and a brief glimpse of what might have been some kind of tongue, all carved from black sand. Webster looked down and started to scream, but the thing began to suck him down. He struck at the shape, his fingers clawing as he attempted to arrest his descent, but soon he was submerged to his chest, then his neck. His mouth opened wide once more, but any further sound he made was silenced by the grains that filled his mouth as his head disappeared beneath the sand. Now the chapel at Black Sands once more lies empty. Barbed wire has been erected around the beach, and warning signs posted advising people to stay away. But Webster was right. The old gods will not be so easily forgotten. Sometimes the wind blows along this desolate stretch of coastline and causes shapes to rise up from the beach. Phantasms of sand that hold their form for just an instant too long before falling in small heaps to the ground. It may take years, even decades, to complete the process, but they will succeed, for slowly and surely they are obscuring the warning signs.
The circus seldom came to the towns in the north. They were too scattered, their populations too poor to justify the expense of transporting animals, sideshows, and people down neglected roads in order to play to sparsely filled seats for a week. William could not recall a circus ever coming to his town, not in the whole 10 years of his life, although his parents sometimes spoke of one that had played early in the year of his birth. In fact, his mother said that she had felt William kick in her womb as soon as the lights went down, as though he was somehow aware of what was taking place outside his red world. Since then, no great tent had occupied the big field out by the forest. No lions had passed through here, and no elephants had trumpeted. There had been no trapeze artists, no ringmasters, no clowns. And so it was with surprise and delight that William watched the first of the posters appear in the shop windows and upon the lampposts. "From Europe," they announced. "For one night only, Circus Caliban." It took William only minutes to track down the circus folk responsible for distributing the posters. He found them on a side street, using a stepladder to put up the advertisements for their great show. A cold north wind threatened to make off with a dwarf in a yellow suit, who teetered at the top of the ladder as he tried to staple a pair of posters together around a lamppost, while a strong man in a vinyl cape and a thin man in a red coat held the ladder steady. The ringmaster smiled. "Do you like the circus?" he asked. "I think so," said William. "I've never been." The ringmaster staggered back in mock surprise. "You have never been to the circus? Well, you must come. You simply must come." And from the pocket of his bright red coat he produced a trio of tickets and handed them to William. "For you," he said. "For you and your mother and your father. One night only.
Circus Caliban. William took the tickets and held them tightly in his fist, unsure of the safest place in which to put them. "Thank you," he said. "You're welcome," said the ringmaster. "Will there be clowns?" asked William. "There are clowns on the posters, but I just wanted to be sure." "There are always clowns," said the ringmaster, and William thought that his breath smelled very sweet, like bullseyes and gumdrops and jelly beans all mixed together. "It would not be a circus without clowns." On the night of the performance, William and his mother and father drove into town and parked their car at the edge of the great field. People had come from all around to see the circus, and a house-full sign stood beside the ticket caravan. He followed his parents through the sideshows and rides. There were shooting ranges and hoop toss, games of skill and games of chance. William was not aware of drifting away from his parents. One minute they were beside him, and the next it was as if the whole circus had shifted slightly, moving silently in a great circle, so that William no longer stood among the rides and games, but at the very periphery of the performers' caravans. Uncertain and a little afraid, William began to pick his way carefully back to his parents, stepping over guy ropes and avoiding the tow bars of the caravans, until at last he came to a single yellow tent, which stood apart from the others. Outside stood a red jalopy decorated with balloons, its wheels misshapen and its seats balanced on huge springs. William could hear voices speaking inside the tent, and knew that he had found the clowns. He crept closer and lay down on his belly so that he could peer beneath the bottom of the tent, for if he was seen at the entrance, then they would surely send him away, and he would learn nothing at all. William saw battered dressing tables, with brightly lit mirrors above them, the bulbs powered by a humming, unseen generator. 4 men sat at the tables, dressed in suits of purple and green, yellow and orange. They had oversized shoes on their feet. Their heads were bald, but they wore no makeup. William was faintly disappointed. Then, as William watched, one of the men took a cloth and doused it in liquid from a black bottle. He looked at himself grimly in the mirror, then drew the cloth across his face. Instantly, a line of white appeared, and the rim of a big red mouth. The man wiped himself again, harder now, and circular red cheeks appeared. Finally, he hid his face in the cloth, rubbing furiously, and when the cloth came away, it was covered in flesh-coloured makeup, and a clown stared back from the mirror. The other men were engaged in similar activities, rubbing away the cosmetics that concealed the clown faces beneath. But those faces were not at all funny or engaging. True, the men looked like clowns. They had big smiling mouths and oval shapes around their eyes, and fake redness painted onto their cheeks. But their eyeballs were yellow, and their skin looked puckered and diseased. Their bare hands were very white, reminding William of cheap sausages or uncooked dough. The clowns moved listlessly, and they spoke in a language William had never heard before, more to themselves than to one another. The tongue sounded very old and very foreign, and William felt himself grow increasingly afraid. A voice in his head seemed to echo their words, as though someone close by were translating for his benefit. "Children," the voice said. "We hate 'em. Foul things. They laugh at what they don't understand. They laugh at things they should be afraid of. Oh, but we know. We know what the circus hides. We know what all circuses hide. Foul children. We make them laugh, but when we can, we take 'em." And then the nearest clown turned and stared down at William. and the boy felt hands like talons gripping his own as he was dragged beneath the canvas and into the tent. Two clowns, unseen until now, knelt by him, holding him down. William tried to cry out for help, but one of the clowns placed a hand over William's lips, stilling any sound within. The other clowns crowded around, some with a little of their old makeup still in place, so that they seemed half human and half other. Their eye sockets were rimmed with bright red flesh, and their long nails sparkled in the light. One of the clowns, now with an orange wig upon his head, placed his face very close to William's and sniffed at the boy's skin. Then he opened his mouth, revealing very white, very thin, and very sharp teeth. They curved inward at the bottom like hooks, and William could see great spaces of pink gum between them. A tongue emerged, long and purple and covered with tiny barbs. It unfolded like a fly's, or the end of a paper whistle, slowly uncurling from deep in the clown's mouth. The tongue licked at William, tasting his tears, and it felt to William like having a thistle or a cactus rubbed against his face. The clown stepped back, readying his tongue to lick again, but another clown with blue hair, bigger and taller than his fellows, grabbed the tongue between his thumb and forefinger and squeezed so hard that his stubby nails punctured the flesh, and yellow liquid dripped from the wound. "Look," said the clown. The others drew closer, and William could see a streak of something flesh-coloured upon the orange clown's tongue before it was released to slide back into its owner's mouth with a slapping sound. The blue clown raised his finger so William could see what was upon it. It looked like makeup. And then the clowns descended, their breaths stale with a lingering taste of tobacco and alcohol. He felt their tongues upon him, licking his face, scouring his eyelids and his cheeks with their tiny barbs, exploring his ears and his lips and his nostrils as they covered him with their saliva. William closed his eyes tightly as his skin began to burn, the pain like the stinging of nettles. Just as he felt sure that he could take no more, the clowns stopped. They stared down upon him, and now there were real smiles beneath the painted ones as their tongues withdrew into the cages of their mouths. They backed away, revealing William's reflection to him. Another William stared back at him from the mirror. This one, pale-faced and yellow-eyed, with a painted-on smile and rosy red cheeks. The blue clown rubbed William's head gently, and a handful of William's dark hair came away in his hand. The other clowns joined in, running their nails through William's hair, until there was nothing of it left but a few lost strands. William's face crumpled, the tears flowing freely now, but the clown's smile never left his face, so that he seemed to be laughing even as he cried, crying harder than he had ever cried before, crying for all that he had now lost, and that would never be his again.
"I want me mum," whimpered William. "I want me dad." "No need," said the blue clown. "No need for family. New family now." "Why are you doing this to me?" said William. "Why have you done this to my face?" "Done?"
asked the blue clown, and there was real surprise in his voice.
"What done? Done nothing. Clown not learned. Clown chosen in the mother womb. Clown does not become. Clown is. Clown is not made. Clown is born."
The circus Caliban was gone the next day, and there was no sign that it had ever visited the town. The police looked, but William was never seen again, and a new clown was added to the act of the circus when next it appeared at the edge of a forest in a country far, far from this one. He was smaller than the rest, and seemed always to be looking into the laughing audience, searching for the parents that he still hoped would find him, but they never came. And his teeth fell out and were replaced by sharp white hooks that were kept hidden behind shields of plastic, and his nails decayed to hard yellow stumps at the end of soft, pale fingers. He grew tall and strong, until at last he forgot his name and became only Clown. And a great clown he was. His tongue grew, and he tasted children with it as they laughed. For clowns are hungry and sad and envious of humanity. They travel from town to town, looking for those that they can steal away, always seeking the child that kicks in the womb, and always finding him upon their return. For clowns are not made. Clowns are born.
To begin, it is a matter of record that Miss Froome enjoyed a reputation as a gardener of some note. Her roses were the envy of many a retired army man, who, after a lifetime of inflicting destruction on others, now believed that he had found an outlet for his hitherto unexplored creative urges in the cultivation of plants and shrubs. Her age was largely indeterminable, but most suspected that she was in her early 50s. Her hair was very dark and untouched by grey, and her face was quite pale, with full lips and eyes that appeared alternately dark blue or light green, depending upon the light. Her body was full, although she tended to dress rather conservatively, and rarely exposed more than an ivory neck and the faintest hint of bosom, a restraint which merely added to her allure. A laneway ran behind Miss Froome's cottage on the outskirts of the village, from which she could sometimes be glimpsed in her garden, digging and pruning, in order to maintain the quality and beauty of all that grew there. She would always refuse offers of male help, with even the most taxing of labours, arguing with a smile that she liked to believe that whatever awards accrued as a result of her work were hers and hers alone. And so it might have come as a surprise to these gentlemen, had any of them been present to witness the occurrence, when Miss Froome hailed a young man who was bicycling by her garden one bright spring afternoon. The young man, whose name was Edward, allowed himself a brief moment to take in the woman's appearance. "I was wondering," said the woman, "if you might have a moment to spare. I'm trying to break the soil in order to sow, but I'm afraid there's still a touch of winter to it." Edward dismounted, opened the gate, and entered Miss Froome's garden. As he drew closer, she seemed to grow in beauty. Her lips parted, and Edward caught a glimpse of white teeth and a hint of pink tongue. "I'd be happy to help you, ma'am," he said. "It would be my pleasure." Miss Froome seemed almost to blush. At least, she approximated the movements of one who was a little embarrassed, but only the faintest rose of blood bloomed at her cheeks, as though she had only a little to spare. "My name is Miss Froome," she said, "but you can call me Laura. Nobody calls me Mom." Laura was Edward's favourite name, although he could not recall himself ever noticing that before. He gave Laura his own name, and, introductions complete, she handed him the spade. "It shouldn't take long," said Miss Froome. "I do hope I'm not keeping you from anything." Edward assured her that she was not, and so they worked, side by side, in Miss Froome's garden, sharing small details of their lives, but largely silent. Edward, occupied mainly by thoughts of the woman close beside him, and the faintest scent of lilies which emanated from her person. And Miss Froome? Well, Suffice it to say that Miss Froome was thinking of Edward too. As the light began to fade, Miss Froome suggested that Edward might like to step inside for some tea. Edward followed Miss Froome into the kitchen and was about to take a seat at the table when she asked him if he wouldn't like to wash his hands first. Now it was Edward's turn to be embarrassed, but Miss Froome hushed him and led him by the hand up the stairs, where she showed him into her spotlessly clean bathroom and handed him a towel, a cloth, and a bar of clear soap. "Remember," she said, "right up to the elbows, and don't neglect your face and neck. You'll feel better for it." Once she had left the room, Edward removed his shirt and cleaned himself scrupulously. There came a knock at the door, and a hand appeared, at the end of which hung a crisp white shirt. "Put this on," said Miss Froome. "No point in being clean in a dirty shirt. I'll let the other soak while we eat." Edward took the garment and put it on. It felt a little rough against his skin, and there were small, rust-coloured stains upon the sleeves and the shoulders. When he returned to the kitchen, Edward saw that there was an array of cheeses and cold meats displayed upon the table. She poured him some tea, and Edward, famished, began to eat. He was finishing his third sandwich before he noticed that the woman on the other side of the table was not joining him. "Aren't you eating?" he said. "I have a disorder," said Miss Froome. "It limits what I can eat." Miss Froome smiled at him. "Let me get you some more tea." She stood, but as she did so she staggered slightly, apparently about to fall. Edward rose swiftly and held her shoulders, then helped her back to her seat. She looked even paler than before, he thought, although her lips were redder yet. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I've been feeling a little weak lately. The winter was hard." Edward wondered if she needed a doctor, but Miss Froome told him that she did not. Instead, she requested that he retrieve a certain bottle from the refrigerator. Edward did as he was asked, noting as he opened the door that the interior of the fridge was very cold indeed, and returned with a wine bottle half full of red liquid. Edward poured the liquid into a cup. It was more viscous than wine, and had a faintly unpleasant smell. "What is it?" he asked as Miss Froome took a long mouthful. "Rat's blood," said Miss Froome, wiping a little dribble from her chin with a napkin. "Rat's blood?" said Edward, unable to keep the disgust from his voice. "Why are you drinking rat's blood?" "Because it is all that I have," said Miss Froome, as though the answer were obvious. "If I had anything of higher quality, then I would be drinking that instead." Edward wondered how hard it could be to acquire something tastier than rodent's blood, and decided that it couldn't be very difficult at all. What about wine?" he suggested. "Well, wine isn't blood, is it, dear?" said Miss Froome gently, in the tone teachers are accustomed to use with slower children in the class, the kind who sup from inkwells and misjudge the time it takes to get to the toilet. Edward sat down heavily. "All a bit much for you, is it?" asked Miss Froome. She patted his hand lightly. Her skin was almost translucent. Edward thought he could see bones through it. "What kind of person drinks blood?" asked Edward. He shook his head at the awfulness of it. "Not a person," said Miss Froome. "I don't think I can call myself that any longer. There is another word for what I am, although I don't like to hear it used. It has such negative connotations." It took Edward a moment to ascertain the word for himself. He wasn't very smart, but then Miss Froome liked that about him. "Is the word But Miss Froome interrupted him before he could speak it. "Yes," she said, "that's the one, but please, don't utter it. But your kind attack people, don't they?" "Not me," said Miss Froome. "I like a quiet life. It's easier to hunt forest animals or the odd cat, and maybe even a sip from the neck of a cow or two, although it's not very hygienic. She sighed loudly. Unfortunately, my scruples about preying on people mean that my strength has been gradually failing over these last decades. I'm not sure I could even hold on to a cow any longer. So now I'm reduced to rats. Do you know, it takes about 100 rats to equal the nutritional value of even 1 pint of human blood. Just enough to keep me going for 2 or 3 months. Do you know how hard it is to trap 100 rats? I'm weaker now than I have ever been, said Miss Froome softly. Soon I will begin to age, and then... She fell silent. As Edward watched, a single tear trickled down her pale cheek, like a diamond sliding across a patch of ice. Thank you for your help with my garden, she said. Perhaps you'd better go now. And with that, she buried her head in her hands and spoke no more. Edward left his corner and walked towards her. He laid a hand gently on Miss Froome's shoulder. She felt very cold. "A pint," he said at last. Miss Froome slowly stopped sobbing. "What?" she asked. You said that a pint of blood could keep you going for months." Miss Froome looked at him, and he drowned in her eyes. "I can't ask you to do that," she said. "You didn't ask," said Edward. "I offered." Miss Froome didn't speak. Instead, she ran a cold hand across Edward's face and brushed his lips with her fingertips. "Thank you," she whispered. "Perhaps there's something I can offer you in return." Her hand touched her chest, and a button on her shirt opened, exposing a hint of the bosom that had kept many a frustrated rose-grower awake at night. Edward swallowed hard, as gently she made him sit down once again on the kitchen chair. "Would you mind if I drank a little first?" she asked. "Perhaps from your wrist?" And she rolled up his sleeve, revealing his clean, freckled skin. "Will it hurt?" he asked. "Just a sting at first," said Miss Froome. "Then you won't feel anything else." Miss Froome's mouth opened, and he saw that her canines were a little longer than normal. Her tongue flicked at them, and Edward felt a surge of fear. Her mouth descended on him, and twin needles of pain shot through his forearm. He gasped, but then the pain faded, and he felt a kind of warmth and a sleepy pleasure. His eyes closed, and beautiful images came to him. He dreamed that he was with Miss Froome, alone in a wonderful intimacy, and that she loved him dearly, even as they drifted into the shadows together. When Edward was dead, Miss Froome, her strength now restored, carried him to the cellar. There she worked on him, removing the major organs before placing his body in a large wine press. When he was fully drained, she removed what was left of him, separated the bones, and put them through a grinder. She took the fine powder and placed it in jars, so that she could mix it into the soil over the coming weeks, assuring herself of another fine crop of vegetables and roses for the coming year. Finally, she disposed of Edward's bicycle by tossing it into a patch of marshland a short distance from her home. When all was done and darkness had descended, she treated herself to a little tipple, her fingers lingering at her neck, as she recalled her first taste of the young visitor. Men, she thought, they really are the sweetest of creatures.
Miss Froome, Vampire, written by John Connolly, was read by Jacqueline Pearce.
In truth, I cannot recall the first time that I noticed the change in my daughter's behaviour. She was always developing, altering, or so it seemed with every passing day. Sam, my son, is gentle and quiet and likes to stay close to me. But Louisa is a more independent spirit, inquisitive and testing of the constraints placed upon her. And as she approaches adolescence, those aspects of her personality have become more and more pronounced. And so it may have been that she had already become something different, even before I moved to the country and the events that followed. It appeared that the rectory had been on the market for some time. It had never provided a good living, and the care of the village's flock now lay with clerics from the larger town of Grevington, who took it in turns to hear services in the old chapel. 4 acres of good land surrounded the rectory, but none of the locals appeared anxious to pursue grazing rights upon it for their cattle. The reason for their reluctance could be traced to a mound in the centre of one of the fields. It was perhaps 20 feet in circumference and a little over 6 feet in height. Its origins were unclear. Some in the village referred to it as a fairy fort, a former dwelling place of some older, mythical race. Although it went unmentioned as such in archaeological records of the area, Louisa liked the idea of having a fairy castle on our land, and so she chose to regard it as such. Frankly, I was happy to do the same, little people being infinitely less troubling to my slumbers than the possibility of large numbers of old bones slowly decaying beneath green grass and daisies. Perhaps it may be that I'd forgotten the stories I was told as a child, tales in which such beings were not kind and gentle and beautiful, but vicious and ugly and hungry for human life. There were words of warning spoken about them: child-stealers, cuckoos in the nest, changelings. Sam, by contrast, avoided the mound, preferring that we take the circuitous path through adjoining fields rather than pass by it, while his more adventurous sister took the direct route, frequently choosing to wave at us from her perch upon its topmost point as we passed. Sam was always a little in awe of his sister and her mercurial qualities. Once again, perhaps that was why I failed to notice the changes in her at first, for they took place against a constantly shifting backdrop of moods and humours. Yet, now that I consider the matter more closely, I do recall an incident some weeks after we arrived. I woke to feel a cool breeze flowing through the house, accompanied by the sound of a window beating against its frame. I left my bed and followed the sound to my daughter's bedroom. She was standing at the window. "I thought I heard someone calling," she said. But I noticed that she appeared to be concealing something from my view as she climbed back into bed. She drifted back to sleep almost immediately, as though she were wearied by her efforts, her hands hidden beneath the blankets. There was a leaf caught in her hair, perhaps blown in through the window, and I removed it gently, brushing the rest of her hair away from her brow so that it would not tickle her in her sleep. As I did so, my fingers touched something rough close by her shoulder. Gingerly, I drew back the blanket. Her doll, Molly, was gone. In its place was a rough form made of straw and twigs. 4 dandelion leaves met upon its back in a crude imitation of wings, and it had slitted ovals for eyes. It resembled a person, except that its arms were unusually long and its torso was distended, the belly enormous. I carried the primitive form from my daughter's room and placed it on a shelf in the kitchen before returning to bed. When I returned to check upon it the next morning, it had fallen to pieces, and black flies clustered upon its scattered remains. It was almost midday when I at last had a chance to talk to Louisa about the incident of the night before, but she could recall nothing of our conversation. Nor could she tell me where her doll had gone, or how the straw figure came to be in Molly's place. I left her scouring the house for her lost doll under the care of our housekeeper, Mrs. Amworth, and decided to take a walk, until at last I found myself, not entirely without design, staring at the mound in the 3rd field. I squatted silently at its base and laid my hand upon it, the earth warm beneath my palm. I was experiencing no unease now. In fact, I found myself relaxing, my eyes closing, the scent of wild flowers and running water filling my nostrils. I wanted to rest, to lie upon the ground and forget my worries, to feel the grass against my skin. I think that I almost began to stretch myself upon it, when an image came unbidden to me. I both saw and felt a presence approaching fast from beneath the mound, ascending along a tunnel of earth and roots, segmenting worms and crushing insects as it came. I glimpsed white skin, as of a creature that had spent too much time away from the light, and ears that were little more than flaps over sunken holes in its skull, and pale lips and dark, slitted eyes, animated by an intelligence that was both ancient and terrible. And it was not alone. Others followed it, ascending toward where I knelt, drawn by my warmth and driven by a desire that I could not comprehend. My eyes snapped open, my mind emerging from its torpor, and I snatched my hand away and threw myself from the mound. But for a brief moment I felt a disturbance beneath my palm, as though some force had thrust against the skin of the earth in order to grasp me to itself. I rose to my feet and wiped the grass and dirt from my hands. Where my palm had rested only moments before, I now glimpsed a patch of red. Warily I stabbed at it with a twig. It tumbled down the slope of the mound and came to rest at my feet. It was the head of Molly, my daughter's doll, and it was only when the first drops of rain began to strike my face that I found the strength to pick it up and take it home. That night, a great storm arose, and all the windows and doors in the house rattled and shook. I awoke to the sound of Sam crying and brought him to my bed. I checked on Louisa, but she remained asleep, oblivious to the turmoil without. And next morning, in the village, no one could recall even the slightest breeze arising during the preceding night. Days went by, and the summer sun grew warmer and warmer. We slept with the thinnest of sheets to cover us, and tossed and turned until tiredness overcame our discomfort and at last brought us rest. On one or two of the hottest nights, I awoke to the sound of a tapping at the glass in the room next door, and found Louisa standing somewhere between sleeping and waking, scraping at the lock. In the morning, she would have no memory of what might have caused her to rise, but marks began to appear on the outside of the glass, faint, parallel scratches, as though the tines of a large fork had been dragged roughly against it, and my dreams were haunted by shadows of flying beings, their wings now free once more to beat against the darkness as they tested windows and doors, frantically trying to gain access to the children within. Then one day I was called to London on business and was forced to spend the night away from the house. Despite my repeated warnings to her that all the windows and doors should remain securely locked at night, Mrs. Amworth, who had agreed to stay with the children, left the window in Louisa's bedroom slightly ajar, so that air might flow through her room and bring her some comfort. And the presence in the fort grasped the opportunity that it had been seeking, and all was altered forever. It was Sam who first alerted me to the change in his sister. Previously adoring of her, he now kept himself apart from her, refusing to join in her games and remaining even closer to me than before. One night, after I had laid him down to sleep, I heard movement in his room, and, upon attempting to enter, found my progress impeded by a chair and cushions and Sam's toy box. When I asked him what he was doing, he at first refused to speak, instead pushing his lower lip out and looking at his feet. But slowly that lip began to tremble, and in the midst of a flood of tears he told me that he was frightened. "Frightened of what?" I asked. "Louisa," he replied. "But why? She's your sister, Sam. Louisa loves you. She wouldn't do anything to hurt you. She asks me to go outside and play with her," said Sam. "You like playing with her," I said, conscious suddenly that while this might once have been true, it was true no longer. "At night," said Sam. "She wants me to go out and play with her at night, in the dark. At the fort," he added. And then his voice broke altogether, and he would not be consoled. But when I confronted Louisa about her brother's fears, she would answer only that he was lying, and that she had no desire to play with him anyway. When I tried to pursue the matter, she would not reply, and I eventually gave up, frustrated and uneasy. In the days that followed, I watched Louisa, noticing now a stillness about her, a wariness. She spoke less and less, and appeared to be losing her appetite. One day I found her examining the metal screen that kept Sam from opening his window until he was older, testing the lock with her fingernail. For the first time I lost my temper with her, demanding to know what she thought she was doing. She did not answer, and tried to slip by me, but I caught her by the shoulders and shook her hard, demanding a reply. I almost struck her. So furious was I at the change in her behaviour, until I looked into her eyes and saw something red flicker in their depths, like a torch suddenly igniting in the darkness of a deep chasm. And it seemed to me, although perhaps I merely imagined it, that her eyes were narrower than before, and now slanted upward slightly at the corners. "Don't touch me," she whispered, and there was a hoarse, filthy aspect to her voice. "Don't you ever touch me again, or you'll be sorry." And with that, she wrenched herself from my grasp and ran from the room. Now I have caught up with myself, and the details are almost entirely known. Night after night, Louisa comes to me through the darkness, a strange cast to her eyes as she says, "I am your new daughter." And I believe her. Close by me, Sam sleeps. I keep him with me every night, even as he asks why I will no longer let him sleep in his own room like a big boy. Sometimes I wake him with my dreams, dreams in which my daughter lies buried beneath a mound of earth, alive yet not alive, surrounded by pale things that have taken her and now keep her close to them, both curious and hateful of her, her cries smothered by the dirt. I have tried digging for her, but I hit stone within inches. Whatever lies under the mound has secured itself well. "Go away," I whisper to the being by my bed. The lights in her eyes flicker briefly as she blinks. "You can't keep him safe forever," the new daughter says. "Some night you'll fall asleep with a window open or a door ajar. Some night you'll be careless, and then you'll have a new son, and I will have a new brother." I grasp the bundle of keys tightly in my fist. They hang from my neck, secured by a chain, and they never leave my sight. Only at night are we at risk. Only when the sun has departed do they come, testing the security of our home. I have already put it up for sale, and soon we will leave. Time is pressing, for them and for us. "No, you're wrong," I tell her, and I watch as she retreats into a corner and sinks slowly to the floor, her eyes shining in the darkness as unseen figures pull at the windows and the doors, and my son, my real son, sleeps softly beside me, safe. For now.